welcome to the show today. It's nice to have you here. It's nice for you to be watching the What Slaps channel. Today we're talking about the mid-level exception. So what is the mid-level exception? Well, let's start with what's an exception. Well, you know the NBA has a soft salary cap. If you haven't watched my salary cap video, you might want to check that out. Also check out the trade rules video. There's a lot of this stuff in there, but we're going in depth on the mid-level exception. So an exception is a way to go over that soft salary cap. Why is it soft? Because you can go over it. You got to play by the rules though. You got to use exceptions, and today we're talking about the mid-level exception. Go watch my bird rights video, go watch my trade exception video if you want to know about more exception. But you're a real basketball sicko if you're watching this, because you've heard the mid-level exception. If you've heard the mid-level exception, you watch a lot of basketball, you listen to a lot of basketball news. So what is it? You can sign a player to a 4-year deal making $10 million a year, actually a little more than $10 million the years after this year right now. It goes up every year with the salary cap. So you can sign a guy 4 years at $10 million. You can find a guy and go over the cap. Usually this guy is a guy that's most likely at the end of his career. It's very rare that you find a guy that's right at the mid-level exception, right? It's kind of strange to find a guy that's like, I'm available, I'm still a free agent, and I'm gonna cost about $10 million. Usually it's a guy at the end of their career that's kind of ring chasing, or is just trying to like fill the end of their career, so they'll take 10 million, or you know, they're gonna be an asset, so they'll take a little bit of a cost cut, they'll take a little bit of a pay cut so they can be a part of a team that's really good. Full mid-level exception. How do you qualify for that? That is if you are over the cap. If you are over the salary cap, the league says, hey, you can spend more money over the cap. You're already over the salary cap, but we'd like to encourage you to actually spend more. If you are under the cap, tough shit. You're in bad luck. If you are under the cap, you can still do the mid-level exception. Why would you need an exception if you're under the cap? Well, eventually you probably will be over the cap, and this money won't count towards cap space. In the event that you do run into the salary cap, this mid-level exception won't count toward it. But you can only sign guys to 2-year deals, not like the previous, the mid-level exception, where it's 4 years and you can sign a guy for $10 million a year. Now, you can only sign a guy to $5.4 million a year and only for 2 years. The league wants teams to sign free agents or re-sign their own players or extend their own players to go over the cap. That's the way they want you to do it. They do not want you to acquire players in trades and go over the cap. So it's like, hey, you can start using these exceptions and you can go even further over the cap, but you can't do it until you've actually gone over the cap. Why? I don't know. But they do want to punish teams that aren't going over the cap. Like, hey, you better spend money or you're in trouble. You're not going to spend any money. And then there's the middle one, the taxpayer. This one is 3 years and you can sign a guy for $6.5 million. Well, who's going to do this? This is for teams that are over the tax apron. So the tax apron is when you spend tons of money, when you spend a ton of money. Your payroll is crazy. This year, the tax apron is $156 million. So you start paying the luxury tax at $150 million. You're over the cap at about $127 million. You're over the tax threshold, and now you're over the apron. Basically, the way the apron is once you hit this apron, there's a couple contingencies, but once you hit this apron, there's no way you can actually acquire more payroll. You can't add more people to your payroll. You are hard capped. Pretty much. I'm going to get to this at the end. There's a little bit of wiggle room here, but at that point it's like, all right, geez, you spent $156 million. We can't have you spend any more money because it's going to be totally unfair. But bravo to you, because you've got there by using exceptions. You finessed the salary cap and got there. It's difficult. It's very hard. So good for Joe Lacob of the Golden State Warriors, who's paying insane luxury tax now and also has done a lot to finesse his way around the salary cap. So bravo. That is the taxpayer exception. So that is when you're over the apron. You've probably heard the taxpayer mid-level exception. That is for teams that are spending loads of money, and they can't do as much as they can for teams that are just over the cap, and they can do a little more than teams that are under the cap. The league punishes teams that are under the cap. You can only use this once a year. You can only use this mid-level exception once a year. You can use it on multiple players, but you can only total that amount of money. So if you have the full mid-level exception, you can sign 2 players for $5 million. You can do that. You can divide it up. It's totally fine. But once you've done that, once you've used your mid-level exception that year, now the tax apron is the hard cap for you. There are ways that if you are over the tax apron, you can still actually use exceptions. But once you've used your mid-level exception, which most teams do, then it's like, all right, now the tax apron, that's your hard cap. So that's usually how it goes. There's a couple different ways when that tax apron becomes the hard cap. One is through a sign and trade, one is using your mid-level exception, and then one is using your biannual exception, which I'm going to talk about right now. The biannual exception is basically the same thing as the mid-level exception. You can use both of them at the same time, but the biannual biannual exception you can only use once every 2 years. Kind of interesting. It's not as good. It's like a, $4 million and you can only sign a guy for 2 years. So that's how the difference is. It's very similar to the Room, the teams that have cap space. It's very similar to their mid-level exception. So you can sign a guy for 2 years for $4 million and the following year it's like $4.3 million. So you can go up a little bit. So who's really using it? This is kind of like a desperate thing. It's like, all right, we're just really trying to get as many guys as we possibly can, trying to be as deep as we can. We're trying to use as many exceptions as we can to have as good as a roster as we can, because you're really working with guys. These are guys that are really ring chasing. They're like, all right, I'll take a $4 million deal. We know in the NBA that's not a lot of money. They're like, all right, I'll take $4 million. I'll do this biannual exception. I'll try to get a ring. I'll jump on the roster. I probably won't play a whole lot. I think Serge Ibaka took one a while back. I have an example of another one that we're going to talk about, but you don't really see him a whole lot. Like last year, the Mavericks and the Bulls were the only teams that used their biannual exception. So they can't use it this year. So all the other teams can. So knowing that like 28 other teams didn't use their biannual exception, they don't get used a whole lot. They're kind of pointless. Is a guy that's worth $4 million really going to provide you that much value? Probably not. All right, we got a couple examples of mid-level exceptions. So the Heat in 2011, they signed Shane Battier. I think he was a Memphis Grizzly before that, but they were like, okay, well, we got our ass kicked. Not ass kicked, but we got beat by the Dallas Mavericks last year. We need something. We need a little bit of defense. We need a guy that's really going to like pressure the ball, good wing defender. If we can bring a guy in like Shane Battier, that would be great. So Shane Battier joined the team. He probably took a bit of a pay cut. Probably could have got a better deal somewhere else, but he was like, you know what? I'm at the end of my career. I've made a lot of money. I want to work with LeBron James and Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh. That could be fun. And they won. So they signed Shane Battier and they won. Then the following year, guess who? The other example is Ray Allen. In 2012, he signed the mid-level exception and he joined the Heat. He was a free agent, didn't re-sign at the Celtics. Obviously, Kevin Garnett, Rajon Rondo and the boys were pretty salty about that, but he thought, hey, you know what? I'll sign another deal. I'll sign the mid-level exception. I'm Ray Allen. I should be making lots of money, but, screw it. I'm going to join this team. I'm going to win the championship for them. I'm going to sink a game-tying three-pointer and then knock down 2 free throws to win the championship. So good for you. Good for the Heat. They've signed 2 mid-level exceptions that won them championships. Obviously, I'm not discrediting LeBron James. I'm not discrediting Dwayne Wade and Spo. I'm just saying these mid-level exception guys definitely contributed. In 2020, Bryn Forbes and Bobby Portis signed the mid-level and biannual. Bryn Forbes signing the mid-level, Bobby Portis signing the biannual. So they joined a team that won a championship. They thought, all right, I'll do this. I'll jump on this team. I'm not exactly sure what options they had, but I'm sure they were taking a bit of a pay cut to join the Milwaukee Bucks, and it worked out for them. So they won a championship with that team, and I believe Bobby Portis took a 1-year deal, and now he signed big money. So good for Bobby Portis. I think he's a great player. At least when he's playing the Lakers, he's killing it. So good for you, Bobby. And I always like a guy that wants to, I like the brotherhood aspect of basketball. I like guys that play for their team. That's me. But now you kind of know. You know what a biannual exception is. You know what a mid-level exception is. You know what a taxpayer mid-level exception is. And you know what the full mid-level exception is. And you know that the NBA loves teams that are over the cap. They kind of like teams that are way over the cap, and they really don't like teams that are under the cap. Now you know. Love your mother. Kiss your dog. Eat a hot dog. Goodbye.